Hypotrochoid is same idea, but instead the point on the circle, it could be inside or could be outside. So it generates something pretty. This looks like the polar curve that you see before, and we're going to mention it later. And epitrochoid, same thing, is rolling outside, the same concept. Epitrochoid generates something similar to the orbit of Jupiter or Mars, or you can generate that part if you know the pattern and you can have the function. So here is the orbit of Jupiter right here, and Saturn and Mars in here. So this one is the function of that one. It generates that orbit. Here is the polar curve. We go back to that one again. It turned out the polar curve is another special case of hypotrochoid, which is hypocycloid, same thing too. And this one called rosette, this one rose curve the student do. So this is what my student generated. This is my calculus project, same polar curve, but they have to determine what is the period of the circle, complete one. This one is a partial period, not the full cycle. You have something pretty. And this was the full one. So I removed the whole thing, 100 pi period. Now remove some of it, so I have the smaller one. It looks like a 3D look. And this one appeared on the American Journal 2014. That's one of my research that I've done there. So if you have like to see more about how to generate this, go to my website, panyamara.com, and you can download this with the free app, GeoGebra.
So I'll take a minute while this warms up. I'm Krishna Foster, and I want to talk about the nature of this project. If you want to learn a detail of the science, you'll need to talk to me later. Elucidating the role of H particulate matter in air quality. And it's collaborative. This is done at UC Irvine and Cal State LA. So it is very location specific, is that particulate matter are particles suspended in air. And this is a picture of Los Angeles where we can see this has implications on the quality of our life. And so chemical kinetics is what I do when we study compounds such as these. Through incomplete combustion, gasoline and diesel fuels, factories, and even forest fires all create a series of compounds that look like these, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. They're carcinogenic and mutagenic, and they're in our air. But the thing is, they change. So the aged component is they change over time. It's not like what was emitted is what you see for a compound such as benzoate pyrene, which has lifetime on the order of weeks. It changes over time in the presence of different oxidants and light. And then that change continues to inspire more change, is that the oxidized products are stable on the order of days. And so what happens once you oxidize those? So you start with an initial composition when the chemistry changes over the course of several days. So I have two major questions stemming from one, is how do H particulate matter impact air quality? Falls into two categories. One, it changes our oxidation capacity. Also, it changes the chemistry. And so both of these things are worth studying, in my opinion. Single molecular oxygen is actually the pet project of Matthias Selke, and so we work together on this question, where if you form single molecular strong oxidant, you can have peroxides and free radicals. They're like the starter engines for all things atmospheric chemistry. Or they can affect climate change by forming water droplets. Here we put in light energy with a laser into our samples, and then we look at the light energy coming out of our samples as a signature of singlet molecular oxygen. And we watch its decay over time to tell us something about how it behaves. Here's an actual signal for laser-induced fluorescence technique, where we can find the composition and something about the rate at which this compound is produced. And so here we see the quenching, also how long does it stay around before it's gone. We analyze these data as a function of absorbance and intensity so that we can get what I'll show you next is the sensitizer quantum yields. How effective is this compound at producing singlet molecular? A score of 1 would be very effective, and a fraction below that is less effective. And what we find is a series of different PACs are very effective. Pyrene, for example, we've just completed a study there, has a 90% chance of having light hit that particle and create. Here is the implications of this. This is work done at UC Irvine, where we put our results into an air quality model. You add the chemistry, and I want you to focus on the light colors. So we have the light colors showing you how likely are you to form singlet or secondary aerosol without, on the left, without our chemistry, and then you add our chemistry to the model. And so there are subtle yet important differences in these models. So we take measurements at Cal State LA and put them into the model with my collaborator at UC Irvine. Secondary organic aerosol are significant, but I have no time to tell you. Instead, this has gone into the classroom, where we measure pH in a very low-tech sampling technique, I'll tell you. And I did this in Honors 201, taught once and only once. Angelina was in air quality. We measured 16 different pHs with the students in this classroom all throughout Los Angeles. And so this is giving you a minute to look at the different structures where we see the fused benzene ring and different patterns, giving you this class of compounds the EPA is watching. So we measure them in a very simplistic way. We just put a filter on a piece of paper. So with this, we then get a little more sophisticated and extract those compounds out with an accelerated solvent extractor, and then we look for their presence using different optical and mass spec techniques. Here's a sample of the data where, yes, indeed, we do detect pH in particulate matter collected on essentially a coffee cup filter on windowsills throughout Los Angeles. So these samples are analyzed, and we can see two classes of compounds pointed here, plotted as a function of different location, where we can see in the Inland Empire, San Bernardino County, we have higher concentration of signatures related to fossil fuel combustion. Also, these two compounds show that, yes, this is gasoline and diesel combustion. And this is a collaborative project. Matthias Selke, I want to shout out to him, and also to Professor Dabdab, my colleague at UC Irvine. And this project is fundable. I have a second round of funding through NIH. So that's all I had time for. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me today. I'll just say that my inspiration for the title of my talk, which we'll see in a second, came when I was doing a little research on the 18th century naturalist, Carl Linnaeus. He produced one of the first really widely used, utilized plant classification systems, and it was based on the sex structures in flowers, the male and female organs, and their general position. But when he got to the non-flowering plants, he just clumped them into a class called the cryptogams. Now, Darwin's grandpa, Erasmus, came along a few years later and translated this into English in kind of a shocking fashion, actually, I think for the time probably. When he got to the cryptogams, the non-flowering plants, he called them the clandestine marriages. And so I work on mosses. I work on moss sex specifically, which is kind of a conversation stopper. And so this clandestine marriages really resonated with me. I'm like, this is exactly the sort of awesome branding that I need to generally explain bryophytes to people, because they're super cool. These are tiny little plants. They don't have roots or any way of carrying water or storing it within their bodies, so they rely on external moisture for all of their life's processes, and for photosynthesis, for getting energy, and also for sex. And so this is moss sex. This is what clandestine marriages actually look like. So that's a boy over there on the left, and he's going to release his sperm mass there from his branch tip. It's going to swim over to the female moss, this archegonium, and fertilize the egg. And then the least sort of clandestine stage in the life cycle here is the sporophyte, which grows its whole sort of short life attached to the mom moss plant, produces spores, and then those will travel great distances to establish new moss colonies. So it's a real important stage in the life cycle. But I study moss sex in places like this, which, yes, mosses live in the desert, but as you can imagine, since they rely on external moisture, they don't spend much time doing active stuff, and they spend very little time having sex. So most of the time they are just dormant, and they look sort of brown and crusty like that. And all of their biological activity is restricted to a real short period of time during the year when they're green and hydrated and photosynthesizing and generating energy they need for all of their life's processes, for growth, for survival especially, and also reproduction. So, sorry, I can't talk. So you can kind of think about the moss's sort of life energy budget as this pie chart. And so most of its life's energy is going to be spent on surviving stressful conditions and also on growing. And very little is probably going to be sort of spent on sex. But we think sex is really important for a couple reasons. First of all, it shakes up the genome, gets you new gene combinations, which can be really important if you need to adapt. over the long term. And secondly, it also generates that sporophyte that I mentioned, which is what makes spores, which are sort of the dispersive portion of the life cycle. So if local conditions are starting to deteriorate and the moss needs to get to a new location, sex is going to have to happen for it to disperse. So for these two reasons, we think sex is really important for those desert guys. However, if you look at sort of their general fitness for the moss plant's perspective, we find that the most fit individuals are the ones in the desert, are the ones that don't have sex, that they don't invest energy into those costly reproductive structures and just clonally reproduce themselves. Now, if they do decide to go in and have sex, it turns out that the males actually incur a much higher reproductive cost in generating the sex organs than the females. So what this means is they have less energy left over for survival and growth, and so they tend to have a higher mortality rate than females. If the female does get fertilized, then she actually is going to incur the highest cost because she has to support that sporophyte. But she's way more reproductively flexible. She can decide to terminate that sporophyte anytime if things aren't great, or if she doesn't like the sperm that fertilized her, or whatever. So what happens is you end up with, in sort of the more stressful populations, moss colonies that are entirely comprised of females, and generally they don't express sex, or very infrequently. And in the less sort of harsh environments, you get about a 2-to-1 female to male ratio. So you might be thinking, okay, if I'm a male moss, why the hell would I even bother ever making sex structures? Because it's probably going to kill me in the long run. And I think the answer lies in this sort of tension between natural selection from the moss's survival standpoint and sexual selection. Remember that the spores only are going to arise if the mouse has sex. And so it's only males that invest in sex, even if it kills them later, that get their genes into the spores that then go and colonize new moss colonies and keep the species going. Okay, now getting back to Darwin, Darwin's grandpa. To popularize Linnaeus' sexual system, he wrote this awesome poem called The Loves of the Plants, and it was widely popular and really anthropomorphized the love lives of plants in a very poetic way. And I thought, well, the tragic story of male moss in the Mojave Desert sort of deserved its own heroic couplets in the style of Erasmus Darwin. So I composed a few here for you guys. Thank you for that.
As my title makes clear, this presentation is about Apple. But first, the important question is, why is this relevant research? The manufacturing sector in the economy has been declining in the last several decades, and the middle class has been disappearing. And at the same time, we're seeing the rise of what is called the new digital economy. So my question is really about whether the middle class can grow again, and whether we're going to see a widespread prosperity under the new digital economy. Well, they're the optimists who think that we're going to see both because they think that the decline of manufacturing is not a bad thing. It means a technological upgrade. So jobs in the high-tech sector pays the workers a lot more than, say, in the textile or furniture sector. And then there's also what they refer to as a trickle-down effect. When corporations make huge profit, they will invest, they hire more workers, and everybody benefits. But I think this perspective is wrong, and I'm going to use the case of Apple to show how you can have a multinational corporation making huge profits, but at the same time with little trickle-down effect. Well, the question is, so how does Apple make money? Innovative research is definitely a very big part, but at the same time, there's a company, it's called Foxconn, and it's a Taiwanese-owned company that manufactures products for Apple. And Foxconn became infamous back in 2010 when 17 of its workers in China attempted suicide, with 14 resulted in deaths. So what I have here is a chart showing the profit distribution of iPhone 3GS from 2009. It's ancient. Just look at two things here. Apple's profit and versus Foxconn's profit. So Apple's profit for the iPhone in 2009 is $321. For Foxconn, it's $650. And we're not even talking about profits, salary. This is not even the salary for the workers. Now, at the same time, there's another slide. You see that in terms of revenue of sales from 2012, for both Foxconn and Apple are quite comparable. So you see here, revenue from sales for both companies around 100 billion, but profits for Apple is 33 billion, but for Foxconn is 2.6 billion. So Apple's profit is 16 times greater than Foxconn's profit. So what this shows is that profit margin has to do with the exploitation of labor organized by Foxconn. So what does Apple do with all the profits? 2013, Apple's total income was $145 billion, but 70% of that money were offshore, not bringing back to the country, and Apple paid little or no taxes on that profit. So how does Apple do it? First, we set up companies in Ireland, AOI, AOE, and ASI, and then U.S. office sold intellectual property rights to the Irish affiliates. This means profit from sales of Apple products in Ireland and Europe and Asia go to the Irish affiliates. And since they are not registered in the US, they don't pay US taxes. And get this, because of an agreement between Apple and the Irish government, and even though these companies are registered in Ireland, but their corporate headquarters in Cupertino. So these companies also don't pay taxes to the Irish government. And Apple is not the only multinational corporation doing this. Other companies are doing the same thing. So in terms of the amount of offshore as a share of total income, Microsoft actually has the highest amount held offshore. This is from 2016. Microsoft has 93.9 offshore. That's the percentage of total income. And then there's Cisco, 93.5. And then Apple actually came in third, 92.8 offshore. Now, but this means there's really no trickle-down benefits. When these profits are not repatriated back to the US, there's no reinvestment, there's no jobs for workers. And then the next slide will show in 1952, if you look at US federal tax revenue, 32.1% of federal tax revenue came from corporations. Only 9.7% came from individual income tax. But 2011 is the reverse. So what we're seeing here is trickle-down financial burden, not trickle-down benefits. Another problem with the digital economy is that these high-tech companies don't hire that many people. Google, 60,000. Facebook, 1,200. WhatsApp, 55. Both AT&T and GM, back in 1962, each hired more than 500,000 workers. So we have a very skilled occupational structures. So what's the solution here? Well, sustainable development through institutional innovation. Sustainable development means prosperity and economic well-being that are permanent. When middle class appears at one time, disappears at another, that's not permanent. So one thing we can do is to think of a new kind of economic organization, and this goes back to what Molly and some of you were talking about earlier, workers-owned cooperative. So we're doing research in the sociology department, combining theory and praxis. And we organized a conference last month that addresses this topic. It's called Sustainable Development and Social Justice in the Age of Trump. So.
But I want to thank Dean Scott Johnson and Kate for organizing this. So this project, Russia's Great War and Revolution, is made up of 250 researchers spread across the globe. And I and my friends, we are putting together 3 volumes looking at the global impact of the Russian Revolution to be published by Indiana University Slavica. I'm really happy to go after Kate and Molly, because to imagine the future, as Molly said, we need new ideas, and for new ideas we need to go back to the past sometimes, right? What is the genealogy of new ideas? So 100 years after the Russian Revolution, why should we care? And so I'm going to convince you in 3 minutes why we should care, okay? So there are 2 stories of the Russian Revolution. And you know, around the world, the Putin government is very careful that they don't want any commemoration of the Russian Revolution. So everything is happening in the West and in Asia, strangely enough. In the West, too, there are attempts to control the story, which is why our project. So the first story is, of course, the heroic story of the men who made the Russian Revolution. So there you have Lenin and a poem by Mayakovsky saying, Lenin lived, Lenin lives, Lenin will live. Scary thought, huh? Then we have Lenin, and then we have his successor, Stalin. He's looking a little short over there to the left, but you see the image, right? So this is a story, this pictorial representation is an image of how we should understand the Russian Revolution. It's all about leaders, and the masses are just below. You see it again, right? Leon Trotsky, foregrounded, and then the soldiers, the little people, and a little bit removed, right? And so this is very powerful, how we tell the story and the images that we use. And now I want to talk about the real people who made the Russian Revolution, right? Who really don't get their pictures taken, or really, whose stories never get told, the research never gets done. And so this is also part of our project. And this is the weird thing. Okay, this is women workers in Petrograd. How many of you knew that the women workers started the Russian Revolution in the first place? Within a day, they had 300,000 people on the street. They brought traffic to a halt. They ground the army to a halt. And this is another story of the revolution hasn't been told. We know a little bit about factory workers because, there were just so many of them. We have 5,000 biographies of Stalin, maybe 20 books on the workers, give or take, and there's huge areas of research that need to be uncovered. Workers demanded a voice in government. They didn't really think that a party should come to power, right? That was Lenin's idea. They wanted something decentralized, grassroots, community organization, right? So their ideas, their revolution was completely hijacked. Now, the project that I'm involved with, we are calling it the Global Impact of the Russian Revolution, looking at how the central event inspired events around the world. And strangely enough, this story has not been researched at all. So when we first started advertising this, we had people from all around the world who wanted to write for our volume. So it grew from 1 to 3, and I think we're going to go to 5 pretty soon. So this is a shot of Gandhi in Peshawar in the Khilafat movement, and all the colonies of European empires were very excited about 1917 because Lenin said that this is not just a revolution for the people, it's for the people of color around the world. It's an anti-imperial, anti-colonial revolution. So this story is something we really know. There you have Eugene and Peggy Dennis, local activists from LA who were very much a part of the 1930s labor movement. Langston Hughes, who was also in Altadena, who traveled to the Soviet Union, brought back ideas about racial equality, very, very important to this untold story. Isadora Duncan, a famous American dancer who moved to Russia, married Sergei Yesenin, and then opened a dance school because she wanted to teach people about democratic movement. So these are just a few of the figures that we have picked up on. Everyone knows Fidel Castro, so I don't have to talk about Fidel Castro. We know about the impact of the Russian Revolution. In Latin America, that has been documented a little more, but there are large gaps in our information, and even this story. And so I love this one because we really don't know the role that the Communist Party played against apartheid in South Africa, and they played a very seminal role. And it staggers the imagination that 100 years after the fact, these large areas of research is left to be done, which means that I'm going to be busy till I die. And finally, I end with Peter Kropotkin, who is the founder of the modern environmental movement, and he was an anarchist. He didn't believe in state socialism, he didn't believe in capitalism, he was an original communitarian. So I end with my question: can the legacy of the Russian Revolution help us combat inequality, political authoritarianism, and environmental degradation in the 21st century? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jessica Bodo, from Anthropology. My talk today is on cyberchondria. I'm a medical media anthropologist, and this is sort of one small area, but cyberchondria, I hope we're all generally familiar with. When I started this research in 2011, the term didn't exist. It just occurred, but we sort of act like it's been around forever. But it's hypochondria online. It's that thing when you get sick and you Google it and all of a sudden you're deathly afraid of your cancer. So Foucault talks about hypochondria, calls it a disease of hysteria. It's basically hysteria online. Microsoft Research originated the term, and I worked with the co-director of Microsoft's research department, who's an MD, PhD in sociology, who was very interested in the academic study of this. Richard Besser's quote is up there, is the medical director for ABC. The internet is a potentially bottomless source of information. It's a game changer, but it also can be really, really bad, especially in the context of neoliberalism, where health is pushed back onto the patient. It's your responsibility. You be your own doctor. When that happens, you get the patient 2.0 movement, which is take responsibility for your own health. When that happens, you get people taking stuff off the internet and going into their doctor's office and being like, I think I'm dying. And as you can see, Murray finds that 85% of physicians surveyed that people come into the doctor's office with stuff and they don't have a good idea of what the information source is, where it's coming from, the quality of that source. They just don't know that. So one of the things Microsoft tracked to start this was page rhetoric, which is where on a web page information exists. The scarier the information is, the higher up it's going to be on the page to freak you out and make you click on it and click on it and click on it and click on it and stay on the web page. So Google's a really benign search engine because it's so general. So if I put in, and I'll use for today, cough, sneeze, stomachache as like the general search term, so you can see it in a variety of different ways. You get abdominal pain when coughing, like maybe that's you cough too much, maybe it's your stomach hurts, right? Maybe it can be lots of things. WebMD has a symptom checker when you put in those same things. bronchitis, asthma, dust, common cold, things that are really standard. It takes till the very bottom to get things like exposure to smoke, like medication reaction, something that's going to be more scary. They have this on their website, which is out of their app, which you'll see in a second, which is you can pick where on your body it hurts, in case you're 9 and you're looking at yourself, or you're a very visual learner. And then you pick through, and you pick your age and your gender, and then they start to really track what you do. So anytime you search on this, know that they're keeping that information for themselves as well. So if you look at things like this, you pick your head, then there's this list of symptoms, look at all those. If you pick headache, this is my favorite, worst ever, you definitely have an aneurysm. That's the number one thing that comes up. This is why people freak out. Part of it is the intentional design to freak you out and make you keep searching. So WebMD on their app has this thing that says it provides useful information, but we're not a doctor. WebMD and iTriage are the top 2 out of 165,000 health apps right now. It's the largest growing market in apps. It's estimated next year to be $21 billion. iTriage is owned by Aetna. So they then send you to their doctors and their facilities and their medications and things that are on their formulary. Because I was doing this research when it had just really started as an idea and as a term, I was looking at Twitter because you could search by hashtag in a day when you couldn't do that on any other social media. So you get tweets like, bad chills, worry it isn't just my sinuses, good thing there's only 141 causes, cyberchondria. Or things like CBS News who were promoting cyberchondria. Like, do you have this? Is this making you sick? Or just word of the day, like thinking deep thoughts, here's this new idea, pushing this information, right? And again, the more knowledge you have, the better off you are. Find Zebra is a really cool site. It's an entirely based rare disease search. So there's 7,000 rare diseases right now. They serve less than 200,000 people. This site is only going to give you rare diseases. It's not going to give you sneeze, cough, whatever, and then common cold. It's only going to give you really scary things. They'll come up in a second. The guys who worked with us, it was an MA thesis, and they were lovely people. They were like, we really hope nobody uses this who isn't a doctor, because with the same search terms, you get things like gastric sneezing. Have you ever heard of gastric sneezing, when your stomach acid trickles up wrongly into the back of your nose and makes you sneeze? Or things like hernia, or hemorrhages, right? Things that are really sort of scary. Maybe you have a parasite that occurs in jackals. You're never going to get asthma, bronchitis, the common cold. It's not going to happen. It comes really far down if it does. This can scare you. Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Okay? Like, don't go to the site. Okay? CrowdMed is the last of the sites that I worked with. It's where if you're really, really sick and you're an undiagnosed person, you can go in and you can submit your case, and then lay people crowdsource a diagnosis for you. I'm out of time. I'll tell you more later.
So my name is Chris Bestesny. I am a geographer in Department of Geosciences and Environment, and I'm a human geographer, and I know all of you know what that means. And so I'm taking a very holistic approach to my research because I'm a holistic researcher, because I'm a geographer. At least you know something about geography. So I'm looking at uneven geographical development in urban spaces, and that's because the urban space will be the site of contestation in the coming century. We are an urban world. In fact, this is globally, 54% of all people live in a city. In fact, 95% of Californians live in a city. So I study conditions of uneven geographical development. This looks scary. Basically, it's how do we socially produce and reproduce our space, and within that active space, how do we then continue to embed and reproduce these moments of unevenness between ourselves socially and interactively. And I focus mainly on struggles at multiple scales in the same space. So I've got a great example in just a second about this, but really what it means is people suck. And I'm looking at why and how can we deconstruct that. So my example is marijuana. I do not research marijuana. I say that not because I have a problem with it, but because I know just enough to be dangerous. So I just recently moved to Upland, and there's a special election coming up in Upland to basically Measure E to outlaw marijuana dispensaries in the city of Upland. So Upland is telling us, boo, MJ. But at the state level, marijuana is legal. So in the exact same space, I have a legality and an illegality. But at the federal level, we have our dear friend Sessions. But I'm still existing in that space And at the global level, I exist in that we are members of the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, Schedule 4, which says we can have medical uses, but that's about it. So I look at three things with uneven geographical development, and what this really boils down to is we may take steps to improve social justice, but inadvertently actually shoot ourselves in the foot because of other issues happening at other scales simultaneously, as we see in the case of Upland. So one of the things I look at is urban globalization and urban theming. So I studied Walt Disney World. They're the largest employer in Florida, the most visited theme park in the world, one of the most visited sites in the country, or in the world, actually. But this actually creates sites of contestation in Central Florida because they're also an autonomous political entity in the state. Walt Disney World is a government, people, literally. And so they have a very problematic impact upon Central Florida as a result of being such a large sink. They also built a town. They actually had to de-annex this from the RCID, otherwise people would have had voting rights and we can't have democracy on Disney property. So part of what I study is how do we theme our urban spaces to hide these unevennesses happening underneath in order to facilitate global capital flow. Second thing I look at is urban global governance. I look at this from a more transdisciplinary perspective. I also look at this from a more geographical perspective. Sorry, Scott. So we're looking at urban global governance is basically yay city regions, boo nation states. The nation state is dying, long live the nation state. So we're rescaling by which of those scales are we focusing on now? So Upland having more power potentially than the federal government. So we're fusing together literature from, and when I say we, I work on this with a collaborator, from legal theory, IR theory, and geographic thought. And basically what we're looking at is the fact that no, what's really happening is neoliberal states are giving cities just enough rope to hang themselves with. Something goes wrong, you're on your own. Something goes right, we'll take credit. So the nation state, not quite dead yet. It just becomes a very convenient narrative to basically, again, make cities fend for themselves. The third thing I focus on is socio-nature and ecological austerity. So a very heavy urban political economy bent here. And, okay, so how is this uneven? Well, this gets into intersections with social justice and environmental justice. It also gets into issues of ecological austerity. This is where we take our dear friend neoliberal austerity and say, well, there's more than one currency. It's not just money. Resources are now being used as a currency. For example, water in the state of California during the recent drought, the cities were put on the hook when the real users of water were, well, people from outside the state. So when we had the executive order on April 1st of 2015, cities had to reduce their water use by 25% because we were the problem. The problem is we're not the problem.
Right.
The problem is agriculture is the problem. And in fact, if we want to have a single culprit, which we don't, but I would say any of you who use almond products, you're the problem. And not just in the state of California, but in the country and around the world. So the actual water usage problem was a humanly constructed crisis. And we blame the wrong people. And so one of the things I'm also looking at is uneven geographical development, going from where I started to how do we look at it now? And taking into issues, not just capital, but also hegemony and identity. Thank you so much.
Research projects, but it's also an attempt to familiarize you with what our campus is. So I'm going to be talking about Pan-African Studies and community engagement. I didn't know we were going to have that whole community engagement discussion yesterday. So I want to make sure that we're all familiar with how Pan-African Studies, how Black Studies was founded out of community struggle, right? So we had the student strike at San Francisco State University. They called it Activist State University in 1968. The longest student strike in U.S. history, 4.5 months. Students and community shut the university down. Two primary demands. One was the establishment of Black Studies and Ethnic Studies, and the second was access to the university for community members. So Black, Brown, people of color and working class folks having access to the university. So it's important that we understand the foundation. I spent hours looking for that top photo. That top photo is Danny Glover, who was part of the shutdown in 1968 of San Francisco State University, graduated from there. This is Judy Juanita, who was simultaneously a member of the Black Panther Party and a student at San Francisco State University. Here at Cal State LA, our Pan-African Studies Department is the second oldest in the nation, founded in January 1969. This is some of the rhetoric that we hear around community engagement, right? This is a much better, I think, approach to community engagement. But one of the things that we have when we have conversations around community engagement and look at the literature is a neglect of the foundations of community engagement. We've been talking about this notion of a Carnegie Foundation classification here at Cal State LA, which in and of itself is not a bad idea, but I think that it's important that we do it in a way that's ethical, that we do it in a way that most community engagement scholars have not. So my research, I do research on hip hop, so I was drawing parallels. These are the founding fathers of hip hop, right? So Grandmaster Flash, Afrika Bambaataa, Kool Herc, right? So we can think about hip hop as emerging, and then we can think about how it's been appropriated. And if I had sound, I'd now be playing a beat that goes boom, 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 boom. You know what song that is? Ice, ice, baby, right? And some of you all will remember Vanilla Ice, right? So, and the way in which he came in and kind of appropriated hip hop. We can also think about Miley Cyrus, Taylor Swift, and there are attempts to appropriate hip hop and claim it as their own. We got people like Post Malone and Paul Wall who really are caricatures of what hip hop was supposed to be, right? Who pretend like they have the rights to kind of claim hip hop. Post Malone's lyrics are really problematic. And then we have people who do it a little better, right? Justin Timberlake, some people like Fergie. I really don't think she does it better. I think she kind of sucks. And then Ed Sheeran, if I hear that song one more time, I'm going to slit my own throat. This is how community engagement, here's a parallel of appropriation. This is how community engagement is presented. I was looking for photos of the way in which community engagement is presented, right? And what they were doing is actually doing community gardens on their own campus, and that's why I kind of chuckled when there was this conversation about how you can do community engagement without community ties. I think that's problematic. So there's, in terms of hip-hop, when we think about, the argument isn't that white people can't do hip-hop. It's that they have to engage in acknowledgement, appreciation, and make a contribution. So here's Eminem standing with Dr. Dre. Right? We can also think about other folks who kind of do hip-hop well, right? People like Macklemore, right? And kind of how he's different. I want to kind of show ways in which Pan-African Studies continues to engage in the community. So these are a couple of slides just of the work that we're doing. That's Jelani Hendricks, a recent graduate who is a core organizer with Community Coalition. Before that was Lachey Brown, who is working with Black Women for Wellness. This was our demand for an ethnic studies requirement that failed here at Cal State LA, even though we got the race and ethnicity requirement. We did extend that struggle and win a ethnic studies requirement at LAUSD, making it the first large school district to adopt an ethnic studies requirement. This is Charlia Gully, who's one of our graduates. This is, I don't know if you all know, but Cal State LA, half of the founding members of Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter that just won the Sydney Peace Prize, came from Cal State LA. So I think it's important that when we talk about community engagement, we commit to being Eminem, not Vanilla Ice.
I'm going to tell you about games. Humans have played games for a long time as a way of socializing, but also as a starting point for complex human behavior such as language, law, philosophy, art, and war. So I'm studying combinatorial games, which includes the game of chess, which you might know, and the game of NIM, which I'll tell you more about. So combinatorial game theory asks and tries to answer the question, in a two-player game, who will win, assuming that the players play optimally? So combinatorial games are special in that there is no randomness involved. So there is no dice, no hidden cards, everything is out in the open. And typically the last player to move wins. So an example is the combinatorial game of NIM, which is played on stacks of tokens. In each move, a player selects one of the stacks and then removes at least one token from that stack. And this was actually completely analyzed in 1901, and I will give you a little idea of how one analyzes these games. So NIM is one of the games that's impartial games, where there's only winning and losing positions. So what makes a position a losing position? Well, if no matter what move you make, you give your opponent a winning position. On the other hand, a winning position is one where you can find a way to hand your opponent a losing position. So you have to play smart. So how would you analyze a particular game and find out whether you can win? So say we have this very simple example of the position 2-1 in NIM. So first you map out all the moves that you can make. So here each vertex is a position and the arrows point to positions you can move to. Now once you have that, you start to recursively label. So in the end, that's a losing position, no moves. Then you go to 2-0 or 0-1, they are winning because there is a move to something losing. Next, you can label 1-1, which has only a single move, and that's to winning position, so it is losing. And finally, you can conclude that 2-1 is winning because there is a move to losing position. So this is basically the recursive way of figuring out which positions are losing or winning. Now, if you have a bigger game, you're going to have a computer spit out for you the losing positions using this very same method. And then comes the hard part, creativity. You have to figure out the pattern for the losing positions, mathematically describe it, and then finally prove it. So here's a game my collaborator and I have created. We're taking NIM, put it in a circle, and instead of one stack, you can play on multiple stacks. So here is an example of 8 stacks and 3 are selected for play. Now what have we found out about this game in terms of analyzing who wins and loses? Okay, well I guess I can, so here we can see this game where you play on one stack is NIM, so Bhutan did the work. The one where you can play on all the stacks is boring because the first one takes all the tokens and wins. If you can play on all but one, the winning move is to make all the stacks the same height. For others, we have not found such nice answers, and currently we're working on those ones that are highlighted in yellow. We found a pattern, but we're still working on proving it. We also would like to find some more general results, but we haven't been successful yet. So let me give you an example of some of these losing positions. As n gets bigger, the number of stacks becomes more difficult. So here's an example. The losing positions in the game CN86, there is an empty stack surrounded by 2 stacks with the same height, and then those that are circled also have to add up to that very same number, x. And then the last one is the smaller of x or d plus a. So very complicated pattern, not easy to find and also not easy to prove. It's an area that allows you to get students involved. I have worked with 2 undergraduate students on a variation of circular NIM, and currently I have a graduate student who's working on a slightly different project in combinatorial games. So, thank you. And